Alright guys, welcome to your first lesson for grade 11 English. Let's talk about some of the story elements that you learned in your first lesson. So we're going to focus on two really important story elements and go into the details behind them so that you get a better understanding of what's really important when you're reading and writing a short story. Today we're going to talk about two really important elements. The first will be types of conflict, and then we're going to move on to points of view. But let's start on this side with types of conflict, okay? So let's remember what types of conflict there are and what conflict is. Conflict is a problem in the story, something that needs to be solved. Winners and losers, big changes. Without conflict, there really is no story because nothing interesting is happening. So we have four different types of conflict. We have person versus person, person versus nature, person versus society, and person versus themselves, or person versus self. Let's start with number one. What is person versus person conflict? Well, those are conflicts between characters in the stories. Think of a love story, right? Two lovers. Will they get married? Will they end up together? We don't know. That's a type of conflict between characters. Person versus person. It could also be heroes versus villains. Think of a cool action or fantasy story. Well, those are conflicts between people. So there you go. Person versus person conflict. That's the first one. Let's look at person versus nature. So when we talk about nature, we talk about the natural environment. Things that happen that are out of human beings' control, like the weather, location. So let's have a look. Natural forces come into contact with people, and that creates conflict. For example, if a tornado destroyed your home, that would be a type of conflict. Or maybe you get lost in the woods and you have to find your way back. Those are when characters interact with nature. The third one is called person versus society. Society are all the structures that let people work together, live together. So government would be an example, courts, police. Those are all aspects of our society that in a story a character might come into conflict with. For example, someone on trial who's being judged. Or maybe someone who is fighting the government. That describes person versus society. And the last one we're going to talk about is a person versus themselves, or person versus self. And this is an internal conflict. This is something that happens in your mind, right? If you need to change your mind about an idea. Or maybe you change your beliefs about something. All of these are good examples of the different types of conflict that you might see in a story. So it's really important that you understand and recognize these types of conflicts while you're reading, while you're writing, so that you can understand their importance. Alright, so that's one story element, conflict. So let's move on to point of view. When we say point of view, we mean who is telling the story. Most times a story is told by the narrator, right? The narrator tells the story. But every story is different, and who is telling the story will be different as well. The most common one we can talk about is a first person point of view. That means that the narrator is part of the story. And often if you're reading a story that's in the first person point of view, a clue to that would be the words I and me, right? I am the fastest rabbit would be an example of a first-person point of view story. The story is told through the perspective of the main character, their thoughts and their feelings. The second one would be second-person point of view, and you often see words like you. And often you see second-person point of view in instructional kind of writing. For example, a recipe. When you're trying to bake a cake, the writing is in second person because it's giving you directions directly, the reader. So it might say, you must add a cup of sugar. We often see second person point of view in instructional type writing. And the last one is more complicated because it makes up 3 parts in one, and that's third person point of view. When we think about third person, we need to first understand that the narrator is not a part of the story, and that there are 3 types of a third person point of view. The point of view of a third person is someone who is outside of the story, not a character that's taking place in the story that you're reading. So, the first one is called omniscient. Omniscient means all-knowing. Sometimes a narrator will tell a story and they know everything that's going on. They know the character's feelings, the character's thoughts, all of the characters. So, almost godlike or all-knowing. The next one is limited, where we only know one character's thoughts and feelings. And the last one is objective. Now, what does objective mean? Objective is when it's neither all-knowing or even a little bit knowing. Objective is when the narrator does not reveal any of the thoughts or feelings of the characters at all. The only way we know the thoughts and feelings of the characters in the story are if we read the dialogue, what they're saying to each other, and the action of the story itself helps us infer what's going on, what are these characters thinking. That is the objective way to do it. So when you're reading a story and you don't know what the main character's thoughts and feelings are, or you don't know any of the character's thoughts and feelings, you're probably reading an objective point of view, where the narrator does not know any of the thoughts and feelings of any character. So we can see that it's very easy to recognize the first person point of view. I, me are indicators. Second person point of view is usually instructional writing, giving directions. And third person point of view, 3 parts to that one. We have omniscient, where the narrator knows everything, all of the characters' thoughts, all of their feelings. We have a limited, where the narrator focuses on one character's thoughts and feelings. And we have finally the objective, where the narrator does not have information about the thoughts and feelings of the characters, and it's up to the reader to read the story and infer the dialogue and the action of the story to figure out what the characters are thinking. So, the question for you is, you've read a couple of stories up till now. Where do they fit in these types of elements? For example, in the story of the hare and the tortoise, what kind of conflict is it? Is it person versus self? Is it person versus society, or person versus nature, or even person versus person? It can be more than one. It does not necessarily have to be just one type of conflict in a story. And longer stories usually have more than one type of conflict. Think about points of view when you read The Princess and the Pea. What point of view is the story being told from? Is it being told from the main character, the princess, in a first-person perspective with a lot of use of I am the princess? Did you notice that in the story? Or is it second-person point of view? Or is it one of the types of third-person point of view? So these are questions you can ask yourself when you're thinking critically and reading as you go through this course. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next lesson.